They read my mother's will out loud, and halfway through it, I realized I was no longer considered her daughter. If you've ever been erased in a room full of people who know your face, stay with me. Like, comment, subscribe if you've lived through something similar. Because what happened next didn't start with rage. It started with clarity. My name is Rachel Donovan. I was 33 years old at the time, a former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, medically retired after 9 years of service. 2 deployments, 1 honorable discharge, 1 reconstructed knee. I had come home believing that whatever my family was, it was still mine. I was wrong. The reading took place in a conference room above a law office in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The kind of place with beige walls and coffee that tasted burnt on purpose. My younger brother, Michael Donovan, sat to my left, legs crossed, wedding ring glinting, as if he needed a reminder of who had chosen him. My older sister Karen Mills, born Karen Donovan before she learned how to distance herself from the name, sat across from me, with her arms folded tight over a designer coat. At the head of the table was attorney Douglas Whitmore, my mother's lawyer, clearing his throat as if that might soften what he was about to say. My mother, Ellen Donovan, had died 6 weeks earlier. A stroke. Fast. Final. No last conversations. No closure. Just a voicemail I never got to return because I was on a VA appointment that ran long. When Douglas began reading, everything sounded normal at first. The house, the savings, the personal effects. Then he said, "To my children, Michael Donovan and Karen Mills." And he stopped there. I waited. He continued reading. He never corrected himself. That was the moment I understood. Not when my name was missing, but when no one reacted. Not my brother, not my sister, not my Aunt Linda Price, who sat stiffly at the far end of the table, pretending to look surprised. Too late. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me." Douglas looked up, confused. "Yes?" "You skipped me." Michael shifted in his chair. Karen didn't look at me at all. Douglas adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the document again, slower this time. "Miss Donovan, Rachel Donovan, is not listed as a beneficiary." The word beneficiary landed heavier than it should have. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because my body had learned to do that instead of reacting. "That's a mistake," I said. Calm, flat, military calm. "I'm her daughter." Karen finally looked at me then. Her eyes were cold, assessing. "You left," she said. Like that explained everything. I didn't respond. I watched Douglas continue. "The house, valued at $420,000, went to Michael. The remaining savings, just under $180,000, were split between Michael and Karen. My mother's small catering business, the one she ran out of the garage for years, was transferred into Karen's name outright. And me? Nothing. No personal letter, no token item, no acknowledgement. I sat through the rest of the reading like I'd been trained to sit through incoming fire. Still, alert, detached. Afterward, in the hallway, Michael avoided my eyes. Karen spoke first. "This is for the best," she said, as if she were explaining weather. "You've been unstable since the Army." There it was. 9 years of service, reduced to a character flaw. I asked Douglas one question before I left. "When was this will updated?" 14 months ago, he said. 14 months. That was during the period when I was recovering from surgery and staying temporarily in my mother's house. When Karen had helped manage my mother's finances. When Michael suddenly started showing up more often. 14 months was not an accident. In the parking lot, my Aunt Linda followed me. "Your mother was confused near the end," she said quickly. "You know how she was. Karen was just trying to help." I looked at her. "By cutting me out?" Linda sighed. "You scared her, Rachel. All that military stuff, the anger, the distance." Distance. I had spent 9 years being told where to stand, when to eat, and who to trust with my life. I had followed orders that mattered, and somehow I was the problem. I drove home without music. That night, I opened the footlocker I hadn't touched since coming back. Inside were discharge papers, medals, a folded flag I'd never known what to do with. And underneath all of it, something else. A manila envelope with my name on it, written in my mother's handwriting. I hadn't put it there. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photocopy of a bank statement. The paper read, If anything ever happens and they say I didn't mean to include you, that's a lie. My hands didn't shake. That came later. What I felt then was something colder. 14 months ago, my mother had known, and she had prepared. What Karen and Michael didn't understand yet was that the army hadn't taught me how to fight. It taught me how to wait, and whatever they thought they had taken from me, they had only delayed something far worse. Because the will wasn't the only document my mother had signed. And the next time we sat in a room together, I wouldn't be the one surprised. The first thing they did after the will reading was stop calling. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just small absences that stacked up until silence felt intentional. I noticed it when my brother Michael Donovan didn't answer my text asking for a copy of Mom's utility bills. Then when my sister Karen Mills sent a single thumbs up instead of responding to a message about returning my mother's wheelchair. Then when my Aunt Linda Price stopped checking in altogether. They weren't angry. They were coordinated. That mattered. I spent the next week replaying conversations from the last 2 years. Not emotionally, but tactically. The way Karen had insisted on sitting in on my mother's doctor appointments. The way Michael had offered to help simplify things by putting accounts under his name temporarily. The way both of them had started using the same phrases when talking about me. Rachel's been different since she came back. Rachel gets intense. Rachel doesn't really fit anymore. Fit. Like I was furniture. I had been home from the army for just under 3 years. Medically retired at 30 because my knee finally gave out during a training exercise at Fort Bragg. The VA classified it as service-connected. 70% disability. Enough to live on if I had to, but I didn't. I worked security logistics for a regional distribution center outside Wilkes-Barre. Night shifts. Boring. Predictable. I liked that. My family didn't. Karen used to wrinkle her nose when I talked about work. "You're too smart for that," she'd say. What she meant was, "You don't impress anyone I care about." Michael never said much. He didn't need to. He'd always been the one who benefited from silence. The version of me they told people about was neat and consistent. I was volatile. I was emotionally unpredictable. I was damaged. It was the only way their behavior made sense. On the 10th day after the will reading, I got a call from Marissa Klein, the loan officer my mother had worked with for years. "Rachel," she said carefully, "I wasn't sure if I should call, but something didn't sit right." "Go on," I said. Marissa hesitated. "Your sister Karen came in with a power of attorney last year. She asked to consolidate some accounts. Said your mother wanted things streamlined." That word again. "When exactly?" I asked. "Last April. Around the same time your mother stopped coming in herself." April, 14 months ago. Marissa emailed me copies of the documents. They were clean, legal. My mother's signature was there, but something was off. The witness line. The same name appeared twice. Karen Mills. Karen had witnessed her own authority. That wasn't illegal, but it was convenient. That night, I went back to my mother's house for the first time since the funeral. Michael had already changed the locks, but Karen hadn't thought to remove the spare key hidden behind the old gas meter. She never noticed details like that. She delegated. Inside, the house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner and something floral my mother liked. Nothing had been moved yet. They were waiting, letting time do the emotional work for them. I went straight to the back room, the one Karen had called junk storage and told me not to bother with. Inside were boxes, old files, receipts, and a locked metal filing cabinet. I recognized it immediately. It had been my father's before he died. The lock was stiff, but I had the key. I'd carried it on my keychain for years without thinking about why. Inside the cabinet were folders labeled in my mother's handwriting. Taxes, business, insurance, Rachel. I sat on the floor and opened that last one. Inside were printouts of emails, notes from doctor visits, a handwritten journal entry dated 8 months before her stroke. Rachel sees things clearly. That scares Karen. It always has. I didn't react. I kept reading. Another entry. 3 weeks later, Karen says Rachel is unstable, that she worries about her anger. I think Karen worries about losing control. The pattern was clear now. Karen hadn't just stepped in to help. She had reframed me. Slowly, persistently, with concern as her weapon. Michael had followed along because it benefited him. The house, the money, the position. And my mother? My mother had noticed. Too late to stop it outright, but not too late to document. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "We need to talk. Karen's upset. You should apologize. Just make this easier." There it was, the opening move. I didn't reply. Instead, I scanned every document in that cabinet, took photos, backed them up twice, once to a cloud drive, once to a flash drive I kept in the footlocker. The Army had taught me one thing well. If something matters, you make copies. The next morning, I called attorney Sheila Monroe, a veterans legal aid attorney I'd met during my discharge process. She had a calm voice and a reputation for not being easily intimidated. "I think my siblings manipulated my mother into changing her will," I told her. "And I think they used my military record to discredit me." There was a pause. Then, "Do you have evidence?" "Yes," I said. "More than they think." "Then don't confront anyone yet," Sheila said. "Let me review everything." "And Rachel?" "Yes?" "The fact that they agreed on a version of you is important." "Why?" "Because it means they'll stick to it," she said, "even when it stops making sense." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. They thought I was impulsive, reactive, unstable. They thought I'd blow up, demand answers, make a scene. What they didn't understand was that the Army had already taken my impulse and burned it out of me. I wasn't angry. I was patient. And patience, in the right hands, looks a lot like revenge. By the end of the week, Karen would make her first mistake. She just didn't know it yet. Karen Mills made her first mistake on a Tuesday afternoon, and she did it in public. I found out because Thomas Reed, the accountant who had handled my mother's catering business for over a decade, called me directly. His voice was careful, the way people sound when they're deciding whether to step into something they already know is messy. "Rachel," he said, "your sister came by my office this morning." I didn't interrupt. "She wants to dissolve the business," Thomas continued. "Said it's not profitable anymore. That your mother would have wanted it closed." "And?" I asked. "And she asked me to backdate some paperwork, so it looks like the decline started earlier than it did." There it was. Karen never rushed. She justified. She reframed. But she always assumed people would cooperate if she sounded confident enough. "Did you?" I asked. "No," Thomas said immediately. "That's why I'm calling you." Something felt off. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat very still. The catering business wasn't glamorous. My mother ran it out of her garage and a rented prep space near downtown Scranton. She specialized in small corporate events, church gatherings, local fundraisers. It brought in around $85,000 a year. Steady, modest, honest. Karen had never cared about it until now, because dissolving it would erase something important, a timeline. If the business looked like it had been failing for years, then Karen's help made sense. If it looked healthy until my mother's health declined, then Karen's interference became harder to explain. I drove to the prep space that evening. The lights were off, but the door wasn't locked. Inside, everything was exactly where my mother had left it. Labeled bins, inventory sheets taped to the wall, a whiteboard with upcoming bookings written in blue marker. 2 of them were dated after the supposed decline Karen was trying to invent. I took photos. At home, I spread everything out on the table. The scanned documents from the filing cabinet, the bank statements, the power of attorney, the business records. A pattern emerged that had nothing to do with greed and everything to do with control. Karen didn't just want assets. She wanted narrative dominance. Michael, on the other hand, wanted the house and a quiet life. He benefited from Karen's version of events without needing to enforce it himself. That made him predictable. Karen didn't like unpredictability. At 9 that night, she called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Rachel," she said, voice tight but sweet. "I heard you've been going through Mom's things." "Yes," I said. "That's not appropriate," she replied quickly. "Legally, the house belongs to Michael now." "I'm aware," I said. "I wasn't there as an owner. I was there as a daughter." Silence. "You've been unstable," Karen said finally. "I don't think it's healthy for you to fixate like this." Fixate. Her favorite word. "I'm reviewing documents," I said. "That's not fixation, that's verification." She exhaled sharply. "You always do this. You escalate." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No," I said. "I document." She changed tactics immediately. "Look," she said, softer now. We're worried about you. Michael and I talked. We think it might be best if we manage things for now. You can focus on your health." There it was. The offer that wasn't an offer. "I'm not relinquishing anything," I said. "You don't have anything," she snapped before catching herself. I let the silence stretch. "I'll be filing a petition," I said calmly, "to contest the will and the power of attorney." "You can't," she said quickly. "You don't have grounds." "I do," I replied. "And you know it." She hung up. 10 minutes later, Michael texted, "Karen says you're threatening legal action. That's extreme." I didn't respond. Instead, I emailed Sheila Monroe everything. The business records, Thomas Reed's statement, the power of attorney witness issue. She called me within an hour. "This is good," she said. "Very good." "Good enough?" I asked. "To force disclosure," she replied. "Once we file, Karen won't be able to control the flow of information anymore." "And Michael?" I asked. "He'll have to pick a side," Sheila said. "Right now, he's hiding behind her." I thought of my brother, always choosing the path that required the least resistance. "Then we file," I said. The next morning, Sheila submitted the petition to the Lackawanna County Orphans Court, a formal request to review the will and the circumstances under which it was executed. By noon, Karen knew. She showed up at my apartment unannounced. She didn't knock. She rang the bell twice, sharp and impatient. When I opened the door, she looked past me into the apartment like she was checking for damage. "You've embarrassed us," she said immediately. "You discredited me," I replied. She scoffed. "You did that yourself, with your temper, your time in the army." "My service record is clean," I said. "No disciplinary actions, no incidents. You know that." She waved it off. "People don't see details. They see behavior." I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't notice the flash drive on the table, or the neatly stacked folders. She was too busy performing concern. "You don't belong in this process," she said. "You don't understand finances or business." "I understand chains of custody," I replied, "and timelines." Her eyes flickered. "You're trying to punish us," she said. "No," I said. "I'm correcting a record." She laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "You think a judge is going to side with you, a disabled veteran with anger issues?" That was the moment. Not because it hurt, because it told me exactly how she planned to argue her case. I walked to the table and picked up one folder, then another. "I think a judge will side with documentation," I said, "and sworn statements, and patterns." She backed toward the door. "This will destroy the family," she said. "No," I replied. "It will expose it." After she left, I locked the door and sat down. My phone buzzed with a notification from the court system. Hearing scheduled, 2 weeks out. Karen's first mistake had been assuming I would react emotionally. Her second would be assuming I would act alone. She didn't know yet that Thomas Reed had agreed to testify, or that Marissa Klein had signed an affidavit, or that my mother's doctor, Dr. Helen Ortiz, had documented concerns about outside pressure during appointments. Karen thought she controlled the story. What she didn't understand was that stories fall apart when too many people are asked to lie for them. And the next time we sat across from each other, Karen wouldn't be talking to me. She'd be explaining herself, under oath. The letters arrived 3 days after the hearing was scheduled. Not one, 3. One from my brother Michael Donovan, one from my sister Karen Mills, one from attorney Brian Haskins, the lawyer Karen had hired sometime between hanging up on me and realizing this wasn't going away. All 3 said the same thing in different voices. "Stand down." Michael's was the shortest. "Rachel, you're taking this too far. Mom wouldn't want us fighting like this. Please drop the petition so we can move forward as a family." No apology, no question, just pressure wrapped in sentiment. Karen's was longer. "Rachel, I'm genuinely concerned about your mental health. This fixation on Mom's estate is unhealthy. I'm asking you, as your sister, to step back before you damage relationships that can't be repaired." Concern had become her favorite weapon. Brian Haskins' letter was clinical. "My client asserts that your petition is without merit and motivated by emotional distress. Should you continue, we are prepared to pursue a motion questioning your competency and credibility." There it was. They were going to try to break me. Not legally, but personally. I forwarded all 3 letters to Sheila Monroe, without comment. She called me an hour later. "They're going to lean hard on your military record," she said. "PTSD. Instability. Anything they can make sound dangerous. Let them, I replied. There was a pause. You're sure? Yes, I said, because they don't know what's in my file. She smiled through the phone. I could hear it. Neither do I, but I'm guessing you do. I did. Before the Army discharged me, I had gone through 3 separate psychological evaluations. All clean, all documented. No diagnosis beyond mild situational anxiety during recovery, resolved with treatment. Karen didn't know that. She assumed uniform meant damage. The first public sign of escalation came at Sunday dinner. Not my dinner, their dinner. A neighbor named Paul Whitman, who lived 2 houses down from my mother, called me afterward. I don't want to gossip, he said. But Karen was talking. Loud. What did she say? I asked. Paul hesitated. That you scared your mother. That you yelled. That she was afraid you might hurt someone. I closed my eyes. Who was there? I asked. Michael, his wife Samantha Donovan, a few church friends. Good. Witnesses worked both ways. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates, names, exact phrasing. The Army had taught me something else they didn't account for. I knew how to prepare a statement. The next morning, Sheila filed a supplemental motion. Attached were affidavits from Thomas Reed, Marissa Klein, and Dr. Helen Ortiz. Each addressed a different piece of the narrative Karen was pushing. Thomas confirmed Karen's request to backdate financial records. Marissa detailed the power of attorney consolidation and Karen's presence as sole witness. Dr. Ortiz wrote, in careful medical language, that Ellen Donovan had expressed concern about family pressure during appointments and had requested private consultations more than once. And then there was my sworn declaration. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I listed facts, dates of service, dates of injury, dates of discharge, psychological clearance summaries, employment history since leaving the Army, no arrests, no complaints, no incidents, competence, documented. By Wednesday, Karen changed tone. She called. I don't know why you're doing this, she said, voice tight. You're humiliating me. I'm responding, I replied. You're trying to make me look like a villain. No, I said. I'm letting your actions speak. She laughed, brittle. You think a judge cares about family drama? No, I said. I think a judge cares about undue influence. Silence. Michael is stressed, she said finally. This is affecting his marriage. I didn't respond. Rachel, she snapped. Say something. You should tell the truth, I said. That usually reduces stress. She hung up. The following Friday, something unexpected happened. Michael called, not to argue, to ask a question. Did you really find Mom's notes? He asked quietly. Yes, I said. And the business records? Yes. Another pause. Karen said you planted them. I let that sit. Then I said, you know I didn't. He exhaled slowly. I don't know what to think anymore. That's honest, I replied. Hold on to that. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me, but the certainty was gone. That mattered. The week before the hearing, Karen made her second major mistake. She filed a motion of her own, a request for a psychological evaluation of me, citing concern for my emotional stability and decision-making capacity. Sheila laughed when she read it. This is desperate, she said, and poorly timed. Why? I asked. Because she attached your VA disability letter, Sheila replied, which proves you were evaluated, cleared, and discharged honorably. Karen had tried to weaponize my service. Instead, she validated it. The judge denied the motion within 48 hours. No hearing. No comment. Just denied. That was the first time Karen lost control in a way she couldn't explain away. She stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped trying to manage the narrative, which meant only one thing. She was preparing something bigger. And bigger moves leave bigger trails. The hearing was in 6 days. By then, the story they agreed on would no longer be enough. Because once you try to call someone weak in writing, you'd better be sure they are. Karen wasn't. But I wasn't what she thought I was either. And the court was about to find out. The hearing didn't begin with raised voices or drama. It began with paperwork. That's how I knew Karen Mills was nervous. She sat stiffly at the long table in the Lackawanna County Orphans Court, hands folded too tightly, eyes fixed on her attorney, Brian Haskins. Michael Donovan sat 2 chairs away from her, not close enough to signal unity, not far enough to suggest distance. His wife, Samantha Donovan, was absent. That absence mattered. I sat beside Sheila Monroe, calm enough that even I noticed it. Not because I felt confident, because I felt prepared. When Judge Elaine Rourke entered, everyone stood. She didn't look at us right away. She reviewed the docket first. Slow, methodical, unimpressed. Petition to review the validity of the will and power of attorney executed by Ellen Donovan, she read aloud. Allegations of undue influence. She looked up then, directly at Karen. Ms. Mills, she said, you're the primary proponent of the current estate plan? Karen nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And you held power of attorney during the period in question? Yes. And you were a witness to the execution of that document? Yes. Judge Rourke tilted her head slightly. As well as a beneficiary? Yes, Karen repeated, this time quieter. I watched her posture change. The smallest thing. A tightening at the shoulders. A calculation that didn't land the way she wanted. Sheila stood. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to introduce evidence that the decedent expressed concern about familial pressure during the execution of these documents. Karen's attorney objected immediately. Judge Rourke overruled him without hesitation. Dr. Helen Ortiz testified first. She spoke calmly, professionally, explaining that Ellen Donovan had requested private consultations during the final year of her life. That she had expressed discomfort with how certain family members spoke on her behalf. That she had used the phrase, I feel, managed more than once. Karen stared straight ahead. Then Thomas Reed testified. He described the attempted backdating request, the phrasing Karen used, the implication that it was what Ellen would have wanted. Judge Rourke asked one question. Did Ellen Donovan ever ask you to alter records herself? No, Thomas said. Never. Marissa Klein followed. She explained the consolidation of accounts, the timing, the absence of independent witnesses. By the time it was my turn, the room felt heavy. Sheila asked me questions I had already answered in my declaration. Dates, facts, documentation. Then Brian Haskins stood for cross-examination. Miss Donovan, he said, glancing at his notes. You served in the military for 9 years? Yes. And you were medically retired? Yes. Due to injury? Yes. He paused, as if expecting something else to surface. And you received disability compensation? Yes. He smiled slightly. Would you say that experience changed you? I didn't answer immediately. Yes, I said finally. It made me precise. A ripple moved through the room. He shifted tactics. Isn't it true, he said, that your relationship with your family has been strained since your return? Yes, I replied. And isn't it possible that your interpretation of these events is influenced by unresolved anger? No, I said, because I documented them while calm. He frowned. You're saying you never raised your voice with your mother? I'm saying there's no evidence that I did, I replied, and no evidence that she feared me. Judge Rourke raised an eyebrow. Brian Haskins tried again. You believe your sister manipulated your mother. I believe my sister controlled access, I said. There's a difference. Silence. When Karen was called to testify, she started strong. She spoke about responsibility, about stepping in, about sacrifice. Then Sheila asked her a single question. Why didn't you inform Rachel Donovan that the will had been changed? Karen hesitated. Because it wasn't her business. She was Ellen Donovan's daughter, Sheila said. Why wasn't it her business? Karen's mouth opened, closed. She had left, Karen said finally. She wasn't around. She lived in the same county, Sheila replied, and visited weekly during her recovery. Karen's composure cracked. She was difficult, Karen snapped. Always questioning, always watching. Judge Rourke leaned forward. Miss Mills, she said, did your mother ever tell you she wanted Rachel Donovan excluded? Karen swallowed. She was worried about her. Did she say she wanted her removed? The judge pressed. No, Karen said. The room went still. After a brief recess, Judge Rourke delivered her ruling. I find sufficient evidence to question the validity of the power of attorney and the will executed during the decedent's final year, she said. This court orders a full review and suspends current distributions pending further proceedings. She looked directly at Karen. Control is not consent. The hearing adjourned. In the hallway, Michael approached me. I didn't know, he said quietly. Not all of it. I know, I replied. Karen walked past us without looking back. That was the moment they stopped calling me family. Not because I was excluded, because I no longer needed to belong to their version of it. 2 days later, Sheila called. "Karen's trying to negotiate," she said, quietly. I looked out the window at the street below. Ordinary life moving on. "Tell her no," I said, because once the truth starts moving, you don't step in front of it. And Karen was about to learn that exposure doesn't come all at once. It comes in layers. And the next layer was going to cost her far more than she expected. Karen Mills didn't ask to negotiate because she wanted peace. She asked because she was losing leverage. Sheila Monroe explained that to me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice steady, in the way that comes from having watched this pattern repeat across dozens of families. "When someone who's controlled the story suddenly asks to talk privately," Sheila said, "it's not reconciliation. It's damage control." Karen's attorney, Brian Haskins, had reached out with what he called a practical proposal. "Restore a small cash distribution to me. Allow me a few personal items from my mother's house. Drop the petition. Close the file. Move on." In other words, accept a consolation prize and disappear quietly. I told Sheila to decline without counteroffer. That refusal triggered the next phase. Karen stopped being careful. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Karen's friend Melissa. She's worried about you. You should really consider getting help before this gets worse." Melissa Turner. I remembered her. PTA president. Lived 3 blocks from my mother. The kind of woman who smiled while gathering information. Karen wasn't just speaking about me anymore. She was recruiting. By Friday, it had spread. A former neighbor asked if I was doing okay. A distant cousin messaged about hearing things. Someone from my old high school sent a vague note about being concerned. The language was always the same. Concern, worry, help. Never facts, never questions. That was when Sheila suggested something I hadn't considered. "Rachel," she said, "I think it's time we request discovery." "Everything?" I asked. "Everything," she confirmed. "Emails, texts, financial communications, internal messages. If Karen's been coordinating a narrative, it will show up somewhere." The motion was filed that afternoon. The court approved it the following Monday. Karen had 30 days to produce communications related to the estate, the power of attorney, and any discussions about my mental state or capacity. 30 days was generous. Karen didn't use them well. The first batch arrived 10 days later. It was incomplete. Sheila smiled when she saw it. "This tells me there's more," she said, "and that she knows it." We waited. Karen submitted the second batch on day 29. This one was thicker. More emails, more texts, more names. And that was where the story cracked wide open. There were messages between Karen and Michael, discussing how to handle me. "If Rachel pushes, we stick to the instability angle. She scares Mom. That's our line. No one questions mental health claims if you sound worried enough." There were emails to Brian Haskins before he was officially retained. "We need to establish Rachel as unreliable early. Military background helps." And then there were the texts Karen never thought would matter. A group chat titled Family Strategy. Members included Karen, Michael, Aunt Linda Price, and Melissa Turner. The messages spanned over a year. "We need to keep Rachel out of appointments. Don't tell her about the will change yet. If she asks, say Mom didn't want conflict. Everyone agrees she's unpredictable, right?" The word unpredictable appeared 23 times, always attached to my name, never supported by an example. Sheila read through everything twice, quietly. "This isn't just undue influence," she said finally. "This is coordinated misrepresentation." "What does that change?" I asked. "It changes intent," she replied. "And intent matters." The next court filing was not subtle. Sheila amended the petition to include allegations of conspiracy to misrepresent capacity and isolate a beneficiary. It cited specific messages, dates, names. Karen's response was immediate. She showed up at my apartment. I didn't open the door. She knocked harder. "Rachel," she said through the door, voice tight, no concern left. "We need to talk." I stood on the other side of the door, steady. "You brought this on yourself," she said. "You could have taken the offer. You should have told the truth," I replied. "You're destroying everything," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to Mom's reputation?" "Our mother is dead," I said calmly. You're protecting yourself. Silence. Then, quieter. You always wanted to punish me. No, I said. I wanted you to stop. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You think the court cares about texts? Yes, I said, because they show coordination. She left without another word. 2 days later, Michael called. His voice sounded different, strained, honest in a way I'd never heard before. I saw the messages, he said. And? I asked. I didn't think it would go this far, he admitted. Karen kept saying it was for Mom. I closed my eyes. It was for control, I said. He didn't argue. What do I do now? He asked. That depends, I replied. Do you want to protect yourself? Or do you want to do the right thing? Silence stretched. I don't know if those are the same anymore, he said. They rarely are, I replied. That afternoon, Sheila called. Michael's attorney reached out, she said. He wants to cooperate. I felt something then. Not relief, not satisfaction. Momentum. The court scheduled a follow-up hearing. This time, it wasn't about the will alone. It was about conduct. Karen still thought she was managing damage. She didn't understand yet that the story had moved past control. It had entered accountability. And accountability doesn't negotiate. It records. It cross-references. It waits. Karen had spent a year agreeing with others about who I was. Now, the court was about to decide who she had been. And unlike family, judges don't accept concern as evidence. They accept proof. Michael Donovan didn't cooperate right away. He stalled for 5 days, which told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't deciding whether to tell the truth. He was deciding how much of it he could survive. When his attorney, Rachel Wynn, formally contacted Sheila Monroe, the tone was cautious but clear. My client is willing to provide limited cooperation in exchange for protections. Limited. That word again. Sheila let me listen on the call. Mr. Donovan benefited financially from the estate plan, Sheila said evenly. Cooperation means transparency, not curation. There was a pause. Rachel Wynn cleared her throat. Michael is prepared to provide communications and testify to facts he personally observed. Sheila glanced at me, then replied, Then let's proceed. Michael came in the following Monday. He looked like someone who hadn't slept. Dark circles, slumped posture. The confidence he'd worn his whole life had thinned into something fragile. He didn't look at Karen's empty chair. I didn't think it would end like this, he said quietly, before anyone asked him anything. Sheila didn't interrupt. Michael took a breath. Karen started talking about you after you got hurt. Said you were different, that the army changed you in ways she didn't trust. I watched his hands as he spoke. They shook slightly. She told me Mom was scared of you, he continued, that you yelled, that you were volatile. Did you see any of that? Sheila asked. No, Michael admitted. But Karen sounded so sure, and it was easier to agree than argue. Easier. There it was. She told me the will change was Mom's idea, he said, that it would reduce stress, that you'd understand eventually. Did you ever ask Mom directly? Sheila asked. Michael swallowed. No. That single word carried more weight than anything else he said. Michael provided emails, texts, voicemails Karen had left him, instructing him on how to respond to me, how to explain things to neighbors, how to keep me out of the loop for my own good. One message stood out. If Rachel keeps pushing, we'll say it's the PTSD. People believe that. Michael stared at the table when Sheila read it aloud. I didn't write that, he said quickly. I know, Sheila replied, but you didn't stop it. Michael nodded. I know. When he left, Sheila closed the file slowly. That changes the case, she said. How? I asked. Because now it's not you versus them, she replied. It's evidence versus Karen. Karen didn't take the news quietly. That night, she sent me a message for the first time in weeks. You turned him against me. I read it once, then deleted it. The next morning, Sheila received an emergency filing from Brian Haskins, a motion to exclude Michael's testimony, citing family coercion and emotional distress. The judge denied it within hours. Karen had misjudged something fundamental. She thought loyalty was permanent. It isn't. It's conditional. And once someone realizes the conditions were unfair, they don't go back. The second hearing was set for 2 weeks later. This one would include testimony on coordinated isolation and misrepresentation. In plain terms, whether Karen had deliberately constructed a false narrative to control access, and assets. Karen arrived late, not fashionably, strategically. She wanted attention. Judge Elaine Rourke didn't give it to her. The proceedings were efficient, focused, ruthless in their simplicity. Sheila laid out the timeline. April, power of attorney consolidation. June, will modification discussions. July, increased exclusion of Rachel from appointments. August, narrative coordination messages begin. September, business records manipulation attempt. Pattern, not coincidence. Karen took the stand. She smiled at first. Too much. I was just trying to help my mother, she said. She was overwhelmed. By whom? Sheila asked. Karen blinked. By everything. Sheila didn't let it slide. Who specifically? She pressed. Karen hesitated. Rachel. I felt the room tighten. On what basis? Sheila asked. She was intense, Karen said. Always watching. Always questioning. Is questioning a threat? Sheila asked calmly. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Sheila continued. You told multiple people that Rachel was unstable. Did Ellen Donovan ever say that? Karen's voice dropped. She was worried. That's not my question, Sheila said. Did she say Rachel was unstable? No, Karen admitted. And yet you repeated that claim over 20 times in messages, Sheila continued. Why? Karen's composure fractured. Because I was scared, she said sharply. Because Rachel doesn't back down. Because she sees things. There it was. The truth, finally unguarded. Judge Rourke leaned forward. Ms. Mills, she said, did you believe that excluding your sister was in your mother's best interest or yours? Karen stared at the table. The silence stretched. My mother trusted me, Karen said quietly. I didn't want to lose that. Judge Rourke nodded once. I understand fear, she said. What I don't accept is manipulation disguised as care. The ruling didn't come that day, but the direction was clear. Outside the courthouse, Karen didn't approach me. Michael did. I'm sorry, he said. Not defensively, not conditionally. I know, I replied. What happens now? He asked. That's up to the court, I said. And to you, he nodded. I won't lie anymore. That was enough. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, relief. Because the hardest part wasn't proving Karen wrong. It was watching my family agree to be wrong because it was easier. Now that agreement was broken. And once formation breaks, the entire structure weakens. The final ruling was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just change the will. It would redefine who in this family had ever earned the right to speak for someone else. Karen had built her power on consensus. She was about to learn what happens when consensus dissolves quietly in front of witnesses, with no way to spin it afterward. The final ruling came on a Thursday morning, delivered without drama. No raised voices, no speeches, just Judge Elaine Rourke, seated behind the bench, reading carefully prepared words that would permanently alter how my family functioned, whether they accepted it or not. Karen Mills sat rigid, hands clasped too tightly, eyes forward. Michael Donovan sat 2 rows behind her, alone this time. Aunt Linda Price wasn't there at all. I noticed those details because absence had become a language in this family. Judge Rourke began by summarizing the case, not emotionally, structurally. Timeline, authority, influence, conduct. She acknowledged my mother, Ellen Donovan, as a competent adult who had the right to revise her estate. Then she addressed what mattered more. The issue before this court, she said, is not whether the decedent loved all her children. It is whether that love was interfered with. Karen's attorney shifted beside her. Karen didn't move. Judge Rourke continued. This court finds clear and convincing evidence that Karen Mills exercised undue influence over Ellen Donovan during a period of increased vulnerability. Karen's shoulders dropped slightly, like a structure losing internal support. The judge cited the power of attorney witness issue, the coordinated messages, the documented isolation, the attempt to control narrative rather than disclose facts. She paused before the next sentence. This court further finds that Rachel Donovan was deliberately misrepresented to third parties for the purpose of justifying exclusion. There it was. Not unstable. Not difficult. Deliberately misrepresented. Karen inhaled sharply. Judge Rourke's voice remained steady. As a result, The will executed 14 months prior to Ellen Donovan's death is set aside. I didn't react. I waited. The estate shall revert to the prior valid will, executed 5 years earlier. That will included me equally. Karen's attorney stood, already preparing an objection. Judge Rourke raised a hand. I am not finished. The room froze. In addition, she said, this court finds that Karen Mills breached her fiduciary duty as power of attorney. All authority granted under that instrument is hereby revoked. Karen turned, finally, and looked at me. There was no anger in her expression, just disbelief. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court refers the matter to the county for review of potential civil liability regarding misrepresentation and financial misconduct. The gavel came down once. That was it. No victory speech, no emotional release, just consequence. In the hallway afterward, reporters waited. Local only. Curious, not aggressive. I didn't stop. Karen did. I was protecting her, she told them. Rachel doesn't understand. Her attorney cut her off and pulled her away. Michael stood near the window, staring out at the parking lot. I didn't think she'd lose everything, he said when I approached. She didn't lose everything, I replied. She lost control. He nodded slowly. I should have spoken up sooner. Yes, I said. You should have. We stood there for a moment, the past finally unable to dictate the present. At home, I opened the footlocker again. The envelope my mother had left was still there. This time, I read the second page I'd overlooked before. Folded behind the bank statement. Rachel, if they are reading this instead of you, it means I waited too long to speak out loud. I'm sorry for that. I thought keeping peace was protecting everyone. I was wrong. If you're standing alone, it's because you were willing to see what others wouldn't. That matters. I folded the paper carefully and put it back. The next few days passed quietly. Karen didn't call. Michael did, once, to ask logistical questions about the house. I answered them without hostility, without warmth, just facts. Aunt Linda sent a message saying she never meant harm. I didn't respond. What surprised me wasn't the silence. It was how light it felt. The family narrative had collapsed, and without it, there was nothing left to argue against. I went back to work, back to routine, back to the life I had built without their permission. But something had shifted. Not in them, in me. For the first time since coming home from the army, I wasn't braced for impact. I wasn't waiting for the next accusation. The story was on record now. And records? Don't forget. The next phase wouldn't be about courtrooms or filings. It would be about what people do when the truth removes their excuses. Some would retreat. Some would attempt repair. Some would resent me quietly for surviving. I didn't need to predict which, because I had already learned the most important thing. When someone builds power by controlling the story, the moment the story is no longer theirs, the power disappears. And Karen had no story left. Only consequences. The kind you can't argue with. The kind that follows you home. The first thing that happened after the ruling was that people stopped explaining things to me. Not apologizing. Not reconciling. Explaining. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for months suddenly smiled too wide. Church friends who had heard things now wanted to clarify that they'd always stayed neutral. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent a message that started with, I didn't know who to believe back then. I didn't answer any of it, because explanation is what people offer when accountability feels too heavy. Karen Mills moved fast. Within 48 hours of the ruling, she filed a notice of appeal. It was thin, procedural, the kind of filing that exists more to buy time than to win. She also did something else. She changed her phone number. I found out from Michael. She says she needs space, he told me over the phone, voice low. From everything. From consequences, I thought, but I didn't say it. Michael had his own reckoning to manage. The house my mother had lived in for 32 years was no longer his alone. Under the reinstated will, it belonged to all three of us equally. That meant decisions, conversations, a structure that didn't allow avoidance. What do you want to do about the house? He asked. Sell it, I said. Clean. He exhaled slowly. Karen will fight that. She can't, I replied. Not without cooperation. He was quiet. That's the point, I added. Michael agreed to list it. Not because he wanted to, because he no longer had the leverage to refuse. That was the theme now. Everything required cooperation, and Karen had built her life around control, not compromise. A week later, Sheila called. The county declined criminal charges, she said, but they're proceeding with civil review. That's fine, I replied. It means Karen may face financial penalties, Sheila continued, and potentially professional consequences. Karen worked in nonprofit administration. Trust mattered there. I imagined her trying to explain this to a board that valued optics. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt inevitability. The appeal was dismissed 2 weeks later. Summary: denial. Karen's attorney withdrew shortly after. Michael asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. We chose a place halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground. That had become important to both of us. He looked older, tired in a way that wasn't physical. I keep thinking about the messages, he said. The things we wrote, the way we talked about you. I stirred my coffee. And I don't recognize myself, he admitted. I went along with it because it was easier than pushing back. Easier doesn't mean harmless, I said. I know, he replied. I'm trying to figure out how to live with that. That's your work, I said, not mine. He nodded. No argument. Do you think Karen will ever talk to you again? He asked. I don't know, I said. And I don't need to. That seemed to surprise him. Doesn't it hurt? He asked. I thought about it. It used to, I said. Now it just feels finished. The sale of the house went through faster than expected. The market was good. The timing clean. Karen signed remotely. No messages, no notes, just a digital signature that carried no warmth. When the funds were distributed, she didn't contest the split. That told me more than any apology could have. She wasn't fighting because she couldn't reframe this. The narrative had escaped her. A month later, I received a letter from Karen, handwritten, no return address. Rachel, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know what I'd do with it. I believed that keeping things controlled meant keeping them safe. I see now that I was wrong, but I don't know how to be anything else yet. I read it once, then folded it and placed it in the footlocker, not as evidence, as context. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish her, because response creates a relationship. And I wasn't interested in rebuilding one built on fear. Work changed subtly after that. My supervisor asked if I'd consider taking on a training role, teaching de-escalation, risk assessment, incident response. You're good under pressure, he said. You see patterns early. I accepted. It felt aligned. In the evenings, I ran again, slowly, carefully. My knee held. Strength wasn't what it used to be, but it was honest. One night, I ran into Aunt Linda at the grocery store. She smiled nervously. I always thought you were strong, she said. I looked at her. You thought Karen was convincing. She flushed. I didn't want to get involved. You did, I replied, just quietly. She had no answer for that, which was fine. The quiet was where this all lived now. Karen didn't resurface. Michael stopped trying to mediate. My family reorganized itself without asking my permission, and for the first time, that felt like relief. The thing about exposure is that it doesn't end with revelation. It ends with adjustment. People decide where to stand when the fog clears. Some drift away. Some stay cautiously distant. A few step forward. I didn't chase any of them, because the Army had taught me one last thing my family never understood. Once you've learned how to stand alone without losing yourself, you don't confuse solitude with loss. You call it stability. The final stage wasn't revenge. It was autonomy. And it didn't need an audience to be complete. The only thing left now was to live without bracing, and to see who, if anyone, could meet me there without trying to rewrite me. That was the real test, and it was just beginning. Stability is quieter than chaos. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand witnesses. It just shows up one morning when you realize you're no longer checking your phone for damage control. 3 months after the house sold, my life settled into a rhythm that didn't include my family's reactions. That was new. For years, even overseas, I'd felt tethered to whatever narrative waited for me back home. Now, the tether was gone. Michael Donovan adjusted first. He didn't try to fill the silence with apologies anymore. He stopped asking how I felt about Karen. He started asking normal questions, practical ones, about taxes, about scheduling, about what to do with the things that had belonged to our mother. One afternoon, he called to ask if I wanted my mother's old sewing machine. "She always said it was yours," he said. "You're the one who fixed it." I said yes. When it arrived, I didn't cry. I ran my hand over the metal casing and thought about how many small repairs my mother had made quietly, while everyone else argued about big things. That machine worked because it was maintained, not admired. That felt right. Karen remained absent. I heard about her indirectly. She'd taken a leave from her job, then resigned, then moved out of state. Each update came through someone else, stripped of emotion, like bullet points on a report. I didn't ask follow-up questions. Distance isn't cruelty, it's containment. The civil review concluded in late summer. Karen agreed to a financial settlement without admitting wrongdoing. The amount wasn't life-changing. It wasn't symbolic either. It was corrective. Sheila Monroe called to walk me through the terms. "This closes the door legally," she said. "No further filings, no appeals." "And personally?" I asked. She paused. "That's up to you." When we hung up, I realized something had shifted again. I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. There wasn't one. Work expanded in ways I hadn't planned. My supervisor recommended me for a regional role, coordinating security protocols across 3 facilities. It meant more responsibility, more visibility, fewer night shifts. During the interview, the panel asked how I handled conflict. "I document," I said. "I assess patterns. I don't escalate unless necessary." They nodded. That answer made sense in that room. I took the position. With it came a new schedule, new colleagues, a sense of forward motion that didn't feel like escape. On a Sunday afternoon, I visited the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't gone since the ruling. I stood there longer this time. Not to ask questions, not to apologize, just to acknowledge what was. "I didn't protect you the way you protected me," I said quietly, "but I finished what you started." The wind moved through the trees. No response, none required. Later that week, Michael invited me to his daughter's school play. I went. We sat 2 rows apart. Not distant, not close, just separate. Afterward, he walked me to my car. "I don't expect things to be the same," he said, "but I want them to be honest." "That's the only version I'm available for," I replied. He nodded. That was enough. One evening, months later, Karen's letter came back to me in a different form. An email from a number I didn't recognize. I read it once. "Rachel, I'm starting over somewhere new. I'm not asking for contact. I just wanted to say I understand now why you wouldn't trust me again. I didn't just fail you. I replaced you when it suited me. I'm learning how to sit with that." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't reply. Not because I was punishing her, because closure doesn't require reciprocity. The hardest part of all this wasn't the betrayal. It was the clarity that followed. Seeing how easily people adjust their morals when comfort is at stake. Seeing how concern becomes a mask for control. Seeing how silence gets mistaken for consent. But clarity also showed me something else. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't unstable. I was inconvenient to a system that relied on my compliance. Once that system collapsed, there was nothing left to argue with, just facts. I began hosting small dinners again. Friends from work, a neighbor, a woman I met at physical therapy who laughed too loud and meant it. No family politics, no explanations, just presence. One night, someone asked why I never talked about my siblings. I said, "We're not in the same chapter." That was true. As the year turned, I noticed something subtle. I slept better. Not deeper, just without tension. The constant readiness I'd lived with since childhood, sharpened by the army, had finally dulled. Not into weakness, into rest. Stability didn't give me joy every day, but it gave me space, and space let me choose who and what deserved access. The next chapter wouldn't be about confrontation or consequence. That work was done. It would be about what comes after you stop proving yourself, about who remains when there's nothing left to win, and about how you live when you're no longer reacting. That part was still unfolding, quietly, on my terms. People assume healing looks like reconciliation, like a phone call that ends in tears, a holiday table rebuilt, a version of the past rewritten gently enough that everyone can sit with it. That didn't happen. And more importantly, it didn't need to. By the time autumn settled in, The sharp edges of the case had dulled into something quieter. Not forgiveness, not bitterness, something closer to definition. I knew what belonged to me and what didn't. Michael Donovan tried, in his way, to rebuild something that resembled siblinghood. He sent photos of his kids, asked neutral questions, occasionally tested the water with memory. "Do you remember when Mom used to—" I stopped him once, gently. "I remember enough," I said. "I don't need to relive it to honor it." He accepted that. Slowly. That was the boundary. Not distance. Parameters. Karen Mills didn't test anything. Her absence became consistent. That consistency mattered more than apologies ever could. It told me she understood something fundamental. Access is not guaranteed. One afternoon in October, I received a call from Sergeant Daniel Ruiz, a former unit supervisor I hadn't spoken to in years. He'd retired recently and now worked with a nonprofit supporting veterans transitioning into civilian security roles. "We're putting together a training program," he said. "Risk assessment, pattern recognition, de-escalation." I smiled. "That sounds familiar." "It should," he replied. "You were always the one who saw things early." I agreed to consult, not because I needed the work, because it felt like continuation, not replacement. The sessions were small, practical. No war stories, no dramatics, just scenarios and systems. Watching people learn to slow down, to document instead of react, felt grounding. It reminded me that what I'd survived wasn't just personal, it was transferable. One evening after a session, a woman named Erin Caldwell, early 30s, former National Guard, pulled me aside. "My family keeps saying I've changed," she said. "Like it's a bad thing." "Did you?" I asked. "Yes." "Then they're right," I said. "They just don't like who you grew into." She laughed softly, then nodded. That moment stayed with me, because it clarified something I hadn't articulated before. Change isn't the threat. Refusal to be managed is. I stopped attending extended family events altogether. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Each invitation came with an unspoken expectation to soften, to reassure, to minimize. I declined politely. After the third time, they stopped asking. That was also information. In November, Michael called again. "Karen's reached out," he said. "She asked about you." I waited. "She didn't ask how you were," he added. "Just whether you'd ever talk to her again." "And?" I asked. I didn't answer, he said. That was new. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to stop acting as a bridge," I replied. "Between me and someone I didn't invite." He exhaled. Okay, that was growth. Not dramatic, but real. On Thanksgiving morning, I cooked for myself. Nothing elaborate, just food I liked, prepared slowly. No pressure, no performance. I ate alone at the kitchen table and felt no absence. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. The air was cold, clean. People passed by in small groups, carrying pies, expectations, unresolved dynamics. I felt light. That night, I wrote something down for the first time since the case ended. Not evidence, reflection. I wrote that closure isn't about tying loose ends. It's about deciding which threads no longer deserve your hands. I didn't owe anyone reconciliation just because they shared my blood. I owed myself consistency. That meant not repairing what was broken on purpose. Karen hadn't misunderstood me. She had replaced me. Repairing that would require pretending it hadn't happened. I wasn't willing to do that. December came quietly. No emergency texts, no dramatic gestures. Just days that belonged to me. Michael sent a card. Simple. No subtext. I sent one back. That was enough. On the anniversary of the hearing, Sheila Monroe emailed to check in. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Well," I replied, "in ways I didn't expect." She responded with a single line. That's usually how it looks when someone stops negotiating their worth. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment. The sewing machine sat in the corner, newly oiled. My boots by the door. My schedule pinned neatly to the fridge. Nothing extravagant. Nothing borrowed. Just mine. The hardest lesson in all of this wasn't learning to stand up. It was learning not to lean back. Not to rebuild bridges that only ever led one way. Not to confuse silence with peace. Not to repair what someone broke to keep power. I wasn't angry anymore. I was selective. And that, I realized, was a form of strength no one could take from me again. The final step wasn't confrontation. It was choosing what I would never carry forward. And that choice changed everything. Quietly. The last thing to return was my sense of ownership over time. Not schedules, not deadlines. Time. For most of my life, time had felt borrowed. From my family's expectations, from the Army's structure, from emergencies that demanded response instead of reflection. Even after everything settled, I caught myself moving as if something might still explode if I slowed down. Then one morning, nothing did. It was late winter, gray sky, quiet street. I woke up without tension in my jaw and realized I hadn't dreamed about courtrooms, arguments, or explanations in weeks. That's when I knew the story was over. Not because everyone agreed, but because my nervous system did. Work continued to grow. The consulting role with Sergeant Daniel Ruiz's nonprofit expanded into a permanent advisory position. 2 days a week, structured, purposeful, no emotional drain. Just systems and people learning how to protect themselves without becoming hardened. I liked that balance. I still worked my primary job, still trained, still ran carefully, listening to my knee instead of pushing through it. Strength had changed shape. It wasn't about endurance anymore. It was about restraint. Michael Donovan and I found a rhythm that didn't pretend to be closeness. We talked when there was something to say. We didn't force holidays. We didn't rewrite history. When he spoke about Karen, it was factual, not defensive. She's in therapy, he told me once. Or at least she says she is. I nodded. I hope it helps. He waited, as if expecting more. There wasn't any. I never heard directly from Karen again. No letters, no calls, no attempts at reconciliation disguised as reflection. In some ways, that absence was the most honest thing she'd ever offered. She stayed gone. And I stayed steady. In early spring, I was asked to speak at a small veterans leadership event. Nothing formal, no press, just a room of people who understood what it meant to leave one structure without immediately finding another. Someone asked me how I handled betrayal when it came from family instead of command. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I stopped trying to prove I deserved better. The room went quiet. Some people mistake access for entitlement, I continued. And when you remove access, they call it punishment. It's not. It's alignment. Afterward, a woman in her late 20s approached me. They keep saying I've changed, she said softly, like it's a loss. Change isn't the loss, I told her. Compliance is. She smiled like someone who'd just been released from a contract she never agreed to. That night, I went home and sat on the floor, back against the couch, lights off. The apartment felt lived in now. Not defensive, not temporary. Mine. I thought about my mother, Ellen Donovan. Not with guilt or longing, but with clarity. She hadn't been perfect. She had waited too long. She had tried to keep peace in ways that cost more than they saved, but she had also left proof. And that mattered. I hadn't won. Winning implies opposition. I had concluded something. The family I was born into no longer defined my limits. The stories told about me no longer required correction. The roles assigned to me no longer fit. And I hadn't tried to tailor myself back into them. That was the real reversal. They thought excluding me would isolate me. It simplified me. They thought controlling the narrative would erase me. It clarified me. They thought silence meant submission. It meant preparation. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It didn't ruin lives. It removed influence. And influence, once gone, doesn't regenerate easily. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself in it, understand this. You are not obligated to remain accessible to people who misrepresent you. You are not required to repair dynamics built on your silence. And you don't need permission to stop negotiating with systems that only function when you're diminished. Choosing yourself isn't dramatic. It's final. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been sidelined, rewritten, or quietly pushed out for refusing to be managed, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, about family, betrayal, boundaries, and the kind of justice that arrives without shouting, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is living a life that no longer asks to be tolerated.